First love is supposed to be sweet, isn't it? Heartbeats fluttering, whispered promises in the dark. That's what the movies and books always said. Back then I believed them. Before Jenny, before everything went horribly wrong. In the summer of 1986, our small town was a sleepy place where nothing ever happened. The kind of town where everyone knew each other's names, where the most exciting event was the annual fair that rolled in every July. I was 16, awkward and lanky, spending my days working at my dad's hardware store and my nights dreaming of something, anything, beyond the dusty roads and familiar faces. "Hey, you coming to the game tonight?" my best friend Chris asked, tossing a football between his hands as we sat on the bleachers after school. "Maybe," I shrugged. "Got nothing better to do." He laughed. "Man, you're the only guy I know who can make free time sound like a chore." We both looked up as the cheerleading squad walked by, their voices bright against the dull afternoon. That's when I saw her for the first time. She stood out like a spark in the dark, long brown hair cascading over her shoulders, freckles sprinkled across her cheeks, and a smile that seemed to light up everything around her. She wore a faded denim jacket covered in pins of bands I'd only heard on late-night radio. The Smiths, Echo and the Bunnymen, The Cure. "Who's that?" I asked, unable to tear my eyes away. Chris followed my gaze. "Oh, that's Jenny. She's new. Moved here from the city, I think. But don't get any ideas. She's way out of your league," he teased, nudging me with his elbow. I rolled my eyes, but inside, something stirred. I didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything. Over the next few weeks, Jenny seemed to be everywhere I went. I'd see her at the grocery store, browsing the vinyl records at the back, or sitting alone under the old oak tree during lunch, scribbling in a worn leather notebook. There was an air of mystery about her, something different from everyone else in town. One rainy afternoon, I found myself in the school library, hiding from the world among the dusty shelves. I reached for a copy of Wuthering Heights, and our hands brushed. Startled, I looked up to see Jenny standing beside me. "Sorry," I mumbled, my cheeks burning. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made my heart skip a beat. "No worries. It's a good one," she said, nodding at the book. "You've read it?" I asked, surprised. "Twice," she admitted. "There's something haunting about it, don't you think?" I nodded, too flustered to form a coherent sentence. She leaned against the shelf, her eyes meeting mine. "You're Tom, right?" "Yeah," I stammered. "How did you—" "I've seen you around," she said casually. "You have good taste in books." We talked until the librarian shushed us for the third time. As we parted ways, she glanced back. "See you around, Tom." From that day on, we were inseparable. We'd spend hours talking about music, books, and her life in the city. She told me about concerts she'd been to, the graffiti-covered alleys she'd explored, the rooftop hideaways where she'd watched the stars. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, we sat by the lake skipping stones. "Do you ever feel like you're meant for something more?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "All the time," I admitted, "but I don't know what." She looked at me then, her eyes reflecting the dying light. "Maybe we can find out together." Our days were filled with stolen glances and shared secrets. She introduced me to new bands, we watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off at the old theater, and she even convinced me to sneak into the abandoned amusement park on the outskirts of town. There was a thrill in every moment with her, a sense that the world was bigger and brighter than I'd ever imagined. But there were moments, small, fleeting, when a shadow seemed to pass over her. Once, while we listened to Disintegration by The Cure, she turned to me abruptly. "Do you believe in the supernatural?" she asked. I chuckled. "Ghosts and goblins? Not really." She didn't smile. "There's more to this world than we can see," she murmured almost to herself. Another time, while walking home under a full moon, she stopped at the edge of the woods. "Do you ever wonder what's out there?" she whispered. "In the woods?" "In the beyond," she said, her voice distant. I shrugged it off, but an unease settled in the back of my mind. One night, she called me just as I was drifting off to sleep. "Meet me at the park," she said. "It's midnight," I protested. "Please," she whispered, her voice carrying a weight that banished any thought of refusal. The park was deserted, the swings creaking softly in the night breeze. She stood under the flickering street lamp, her hair glowing like a halo. "I want to show you something." she said, taking my hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm night. Where are we going? I asked as she led me toward the woods behind the old school. Somewhere special. We slipped into the shadows of the trees, the world narrowing to the path before us. The canopy above blocked out the moonlight, and the air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and moss. Jenny, maybe we should turn back, I suggested, a knot forming in my stomach. She squeezed my hand. Trust me. We walked deeper, the silence broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant hoot of an owl. The darkness pressed in, and strange shapes seemed to loom just beyond my vision. Finally, we entered a clearing bathed in silvery light. In the center stood a circle of ancient stones, their surfaces etched with symbols I didn't recognize. Candles flickered atop each one, though there was no flame, only a cold, unnatural glow. What is this place? I breathed. She stepped into the circle, her face serene. It's a place of connection, she said, between our world and others. A chill ran down my spine. Jenny, this is... Do you trust me? She asked, her eyes searching mine. Yes, but... Then join me. Reluctantly, I stepped forward. The moment I crossed the boundary of stones, a shiver coursed through me, as if I'd walked through an invisible curtain of ice. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, ornate dagger. Moonlight glinted off its blade, illuminating intricate engravings along the hilt. My heart pounded. What's that for? Her gaze softened. A token, a small sacrifice to show we're sincere. I took a step back. Jenny, this is crazy. Let's go back. She moved closer, her expression pleading. Just a tiny cut, she insisted. It'll bind us together. Bind us? To what? To each other, to something greater than ourselves. I looked into her eyes, and for a moment I saw something, an age, a depth that didn't belong to a 16-year-old girl. An ancient sorrow, a longing that spanned lifetimes. Please, she whispered. My mind swirled with confusion and fear, but beneath it all was that unshakable pull she had over me. I nodded slowly. She smiled, relief washing over her features. Gently, she took my hand and pressed the tip of the dagger against my palm. A sharp sting and a bead of blood welled up. She did the same to her own hand, then intertwined our fingers. Our blood mingled, warm and sticky. Now close your eyes, she instructed. I obeyed, the world turning dark. She began to speak in a language I didn't understand, a rhythmic chant that sent a prickling sensation down my neck. The air around us shifted. A low hum filled my ears, growing louder with each passing second. The ground beneath us seemed to vibrate, and a sudden gust whipped around the circle, tearing leaves from the trees. Fear surged through me. Jenny, what's happening? I shouted over the rising wind. She didn't respond, her chant intensifying. I opened my eyes and gasped. The shadows beyond the circle writhed and twisted, forming shapes, figures that lurked at the edge of the light. Whispers filled the air, overlapping and echoing. Some sounded like pleas, others like sinister laughter. I tried to pull my hand away, but Jenny's grip was iron. Her eyes snapped open, now glowing with an otherworldly light. Her features distorted subtly, something dark and unrecognizable flickering beneath her skin. Jenny, stop! You're scaring me! She turned to me, and for a fleeting moment, her face was a mask of anguish. I can't hold them back, she choked out. I'm sorry. The figures moved closer, their forms becoming clearer, elongated limbs, eyes gleaming like embers, mouths stretched into unnatural grins. Panic overtook me. With all my strength, I wrenched my hand free and stumbled backward, tripping over a root and crashing to the ground. Run! She screamed, her voice layered with others, some deep and guttural, others high and piercing. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline fueling my sprint back through the woods. Branches lashed at my face and arms, the whispers chasing me, growing louder, more frantic. Tom, stay, join us. I burst out of the trees, gasping for breath, my heart threatening to tear out of my chest. Behind me, the woods were silent, the darkness watching. I didn't stop until I reached my house, slamming the door behind me and collapsing onto the floor. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to make sense of what had happened. The next day, Jenny was gone. Her parents were frantic. The whole town organized a search party, combing the woods, the lake, every abandoned building. But there was no trace of her. She wouldn't just run away, her mother wept. She loved it here. I wanted to tell them everything, but who would believe me? I could barely believe it myself. Weeks turned into months. I withdrew from everyone. Chris, my parents, the world. Nightmares plagued me, visions of shadows and whispers that never ceased. One afternoon, I mustered the courage to return to the clearing. The stones were gone, the ground undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. But as I turned to leave, I spotted something glinting among the leaves, a small pin with the logo of the cure. Back home, I began researching, diving into Old Town records and folklore. Stories surfaced of disappearances dating back over a century. Always a girl, always around 16, captivating yet elusive. She appeared every few decades, and with her arrival came whispers of dark rituals and lost souls. I found an old photograph tucked away in the library archives, a group of townsfolk from 1926. Among them stood a girl who looked eerily like Jenny, her eyes piercing even from the faded print. The more I uncovered, the deeper the dread sank. Jenny wasn't just a girl, she was something else entirely, an immortal being, a witch bound to the shadows, feeding off the lifeblood of those she ensnared. Years passed, but the shadows never left me. I drifted from town to town, never staying in one place too long. Sleep became a rare luxury. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whispers. I tried to build a life, got a job at a bookstore in Portland, dated a girl named Lisa who loved poetry and had a laugh that reminded me of sunlight. For a while, I almost felt normal, but the paranoia always crept back in. I'd catch glimpses of a familiar silhouette in a crowd, or hear a snatch of a melody that Jenny used to hum. One morning, Lisa found me burning old letters in the sink. "Tom, what's going on?" she demanded. "I can't explain," I muttered, avoiding her gaze. "You're scaring me. Please, talk to me." But how could I burden her with the truth? Eventually, she left, and I was alone again. A few months ago, I started receiving letters, plain envelopes with no return address. The first one contained a single sentence: "I've missed you." I moved across the country, changed my name, but the letters kept finding me. Each one made my heart race, my hands shake. The last one arrived yesterday, slipped under my apartment door. The paper was old, the ink a deep crimson that smelled of iron. "I'm here." That night the whispers returned, louder than ever. Shadows danced on the walls, forming shapes I dared not recognize. A cold breath brushed against my ear, and her voice, impossible yet unmistakable, whispered my name. "Tom." I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, but the room was empty. Sleep eluded me after that. I sat by the window, watching the darkness until the first light of dawn. Now, as I write this, I can feel her closing in. The air around me is heavy, the shadows longer than they should be. I know that running is futile. She has found me, just as she always said she would. First love is supposed to be sweet, isn't it? But Jenny was never just a girl from the city with a love for indie bands and old books. She was the darkness between the stars, the whisper in the night. I realize now that some connections can't be broken. Some shadows never fade, and as the sun dips below the horizon, casting the world into twilight, I accept that this is the end of my story. A gentle knock echoes through the silent room. My heart stills. I turn slowly toward the door, the final barrier between me and the past I've tried so desperately to escape. "Tom," her voice calls softly from the other side. "It's time." Taking a deep breath, I rise from my chair. The inevitable has caught up with me, and perhaps in facing it, I can find some semblance of peace. I reach for the doorknob, my hands steady. As the door swings open, I'm enveloped in darkness, and the whispers welcome me home.
In the spectral silence that follows the tale of the girl that I loved, we find ourselves lost in the labyrinth of human nature. It's a haunting reminder that love, in its most desperate form, can drive us to the edges of sanity and reality. As we wander the shadowy lanes of Ravenwood, we too are drawn by the siren song of mysteries that lie just out of sight, just beyond our grasp. This tale, like the elusive figure at the edge of my vision, beckons us to question, how far would we venture into the unknown for those we cherish? Would we dare to cross the threshold where reality blurs into the supernatural? Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me in this journey into the heart of darkness. Remember, new episodes of Twisted Tales haunt the airwaves every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Until we meet again, may your dreams be undisturbed and your curiosity insatiable. In the hush of the night, in the whisper of the wind, remember, Ravenwood waits, and so do its stories.